One of the big trends we have seen in the last 10, 15 years is where any significant weather happens, Democrats and the media start screaming climate change. They start screaming that it's all about climate change. Here's the president of the United States over the weekend talking about the terrible tornadoes that ripped through Tennessee and Kentucky, killing hundreds of people. The devastation is hard to grasp. Even in the videos and pictures, it's just hard to understand just how awful the situation is there.
All that I know is that the intensity of the weather across the board has some impacts as a consequence of the warming of the planet and the climate change. The specific impact on these specific storms, I can't say at this point. I'm going to be asking the EPA and others to take a look at that. But the fact is that we all know everything is more intense when the climate is warming.
That was the President of the United States, and here's the FEMA director for the President of the United States.
The governor of Kentucky called this the most devastating tornado event in his state's history. How unusual is it to see a storm this powerful this late in the year?
You know, I think it's incredibly unusual. We do see tornadoes in December. That part is not unusual. But at this magnitude, I don't think we've ever seen one this late in the year, but it's also historic. The severity and the amount of time this tornado or these tornadoes spent on the ground is unprecedented.
You got that? There are rampant speculations that climate change had something to do with all of this. I want you to go back in the time machine 64 years. It is December 18th, my wife's birthday, 1957. 25 tornadoes tore through southern Illinois. 25. There were 3 EF1 tornadoes, 11 EF2 tornadoes, 8 EF3 tornadoes, 2 EF4 tornadoes, and 1 EF5 tornado, EF5 being the strongest, most powerful tornadoes. We are coming up on the 64th anniversary of that happening. This is not some sort of random anomaly in American history. It has happened, and people who have no sense of history tend to forget it. There has been an organized push over the past few years about climate change in this country, from the media to Democratic politicians. Here's what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, run by the United Nations, says, and this is a quote: attribution of certain classes of extreme weather, e.g. tornadoes, is beyond current modeling and theoretical capabilities. Trends in tornadoes associated with severe convective storms are not robustly detected in climate change models. Those are the facts. But you don't hear that in the media. What you hear is denialism. Michael Mann is one of the biggest, loudest voices in climate change, has been for years, was on television. He wants censorship of people pointing out these sorts of facts, it sounds like.
Here we saw nearly 100 people die from these unprecedented tornadoes. But if you look at the total impact of climate change around the world, wildfires, droughts, floods, heat waves, coastal inundation, climate change is already costing far more lives than COVID-19. It is deadlier. And so the denial of climate change is deadlier even than the denial of the basic science behind COVID-19. But here's the difference. There isn't a huge global lobby, the world's most powerful industry, wealthiest and most powerful industry, the fossil fuel industry, that has a stake in the COVID-19 debate.
And he wants people silenced who are critics. Major media outlets are stepping up to silence critics. I think it's the Los Angeles Times won't allow someone considered a climate change denier to have access to their newspapers. Now, this is the very interesting twist. It's kind of like what they've done with language on COVID. You know, if you support vaccines but are opposed to mandates, the wokes who run the Merriam-Webster's dictionary have redefined anti-vax to mean someone who is not just opposed to vaccines, but supports vaccines, but opposes mandates. So you're anti-vaccine if you oppose mandates. Even if you support the vaccine, even if you got it yourself, you're considered anti-vax. In the same way, you're a climate change denier if you accept the climate is changing, but don't want to do what the left wants us to do about it. They've been doing this for a long time. You know, here's my problem with climate change. And by the way, let me go on record. I think the climate is changing. The climate always changes. I do think humanity has a role to play. There are 7 billion people on planet Earth. It is impossible for us not to play a role in a system-wide symbiotic relationship with the rest of the planet. It is impossible for us not to be playing a role. That does not mean, however, that we are the predominant factor. It does not mean there aren't other factors. It's a complicated system, and we base a lot of what we want to do, or a lot of what the governments want to do on climate change, based on computer models. I think we are involved in causing the climate to change. I do. I also don't care. I know you're supposed to care passionately about this issue. I don't care. I think our role is overstated by a bunch of antagonistic hysterics who think that we have to scare ourselves into carrying out their agenda so that they can get government funding. I think there are things we can do, responsibly should do, but here's the problem. If we all hold our breath and die tomorrow in the United States and we shut down the entire U.S. economy, you know what? China, Russia, India, Brazil, the BRIC nations, BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China, they will continue to output so much into the atmosphere as to offset our cessation of existence. So why should we give up our existence when it's not going to do anything? We can't make China stop, and we can't trust China to do the right thing. All the time, China says they're going to do something, and they lie continuously. Really, you're going to keep African countries poor so they don't get air conditioner, to hold them back so they don't contribute. That's not going to last long. So how about adaptation? We're supposedly an adaptable, evolving species. The supposed scientists who tell us the world is warming tell us we're an adaptable species, so adapt. If you think the sea is rising, well, look at the Netherlands, build seawalls. You think the world is warming? Well, you know what? It's actually good for crops. You think global cooling is a good idea? Look how many more people die every year of cold than warming. Look at what's happening in Europe. I mentioned this last week. Europe has an energy crisis. They have moved so quickly to renewable energy, it has driven up their costs to the point where they're thinking of, in some cases, having to reopen fossil fuel plants, but also making them dependent on Russian natural gas. We pay, on average, 90 megawatt hours of power in this country. France and Germany are about to pay over $450 dollars per megawatt hour of energy. It's going to hurt poor people. In fact, every solution that the left comes up with to fight climate change hurts the poor. The wealthy can put their solar panels on their roofs and build their windmills in their backyard and buy their Teslas. You can't. And every time there's a weather event, every time people die, the Democrats rush out to blame all of you, me, and the Republicans for being climate change deniers. I don't deny the climate is changing. I just don't care. I think we have to adapt. I think we can't give up our lifestyle, because here's one of the things people forget. In the 1970s, it's true. It is very true. In the 1970s, it was global cooling, not global warming. They say, oh, our bad, we made a mistake. It's global warming now. But you know what? They've changed from global cooling to global warming. It's just very interesting to me that the solutions to stop global warming are exactly the solutions they came up with to stop global cooling. Why is that exactly? It is a documented historic fact that in the 1980s, the Soviet Union funded a lot of Western environmentalist groups that were seen as anti-capitalist in their solutions. They don't have the Soviets around now. Now they've got Hollywood to fund their anti-capitalist regimes. And from the 1970s in global cooling to the 2000s in global warming, their solutions are always the same. The West must cease to exist on capitalism and the free market. We all need command and control economies. Well, you know what? The largest command and control economy on planet Earth, China, is doing nothing substantive to help with global warming. Do you really believe it will change if we give up capitalism? Of course not. Of course not. Maybe the problem really isn't they're super worried about climate change. Maybe the problem is they're actually super worried about Western democracy and capitalism.